Hello, good evening, and welcome to WHQR's Prologue. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight through the Zoom webinar or live on Facebook. We are very excited to be speaking to our guest, who we originally had scheduled a couple months ago, and things got all confusing. I don't even remember now. Time is so strange, but we are very happy to have her back, and I'll be looking at questions, so anyone who has questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will be sure to ask them. And first, I will welcome our moderator host, Ben Steelman.
Thank you, Miss Mary. Our guest offer tonight needs no introduction, but I'm going to bore you with one anyway. According to her biography, she worked as a wandering busker on the streets of New York City, managed a Coney Island tattoo and piercing show, worked at a dolphin research center before among other things, helping found a small mini press in North Carolina and working, as many people here are working for many years with Dreams Incorporated. Her adult novel, The Memory Thief, made the New York Times bestseller list. She also wrote The Dreamkeeper's Daughter, and helped edit and contribute to two story anthologies, Wicked South and Unbound. She's now working on a young adult science fiction trilogy, and the first book in the series, Sword of the Seven Seas, was just this past week chosen as the young adult fiction winner for 2021 by the North Carolina Author Project. Congratulations. We'll be talking about her new book, Siege of the Seven Sins. Please welcome Emily Colin. How are you, Emily?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. Now I feel like I have a lot to live up to with that introduction, so thank you for that.
Well, you do a lot. You've in the Seven Sins series, you've created this sort of alternate world set in the future after a sort of semi-unspecified environmental crisis. We have two young people, Ava and Ari in love, who have escaped from a puritanical city-state called the Commonwealth. They are off in what they have been told was a barbarian, hellish wilderness, which didn't turn out to be quite as hellish as they thought. And in Siege of the Seven Sins, they take off on a trek across what used to be the United States. How hard was it to create this alternate world here?
Well, this was the first time that I had ever written a sci-fi / fantasy or dystopian fantasy, whatever you want to call it, novel. And so in any novel that you write, you have some degree of world building in that, even if it's set in our world, you're constructing your character's view of that world. Maybe you're inventing a coffee shop here, or you're recreating your concept of 1950s Wilmington there, or whatever it might be. But this was very different because I was taking our existing world, our existing United States, and running it through a filter. And so in this book, like you mentioned, Ben, my two main characters do travel basically across the country. So they're going from their Commonwealth, their little community, which is called the Commonwealth of Ashes, which is a nod to Asheville, North Carolina, actually. And so they're going from Asheville, North Carolina, which they only know as the Commonwealth of Ashes, and they're traveling across the United States to Montana. And so I had to really envision in this post-apocalyptic version in my brain of the United States, first of all, what's the walking route between Asheville, North Carolina and Montana? So that was kind of where I started. And I Google Earthed it. Google Earth, especially in the pandemic, I think is every writer's best friend, because you can see where you want to go and zoom in on it and walk the streets virtually. But I did that. And I mapped literally using Google Maps what you would see if you walked a route from North Carolina to Montana. And I imagine them going through Chicago and thinking about the Great Lakes, and they'd never seen skyscrapers before. And what did those look like sunk into the sea? And so just really recreating our world through the lens of these incredibly too sheltered individuals who are seeing our United States after an apocalypse. So that was, I don't want to say it was fun to do. It sounds a little bit, I don't know what, sadistic, but it was fun to do, just to imagine a totally different lens through which to see our world.
Speaking of sadistic, you really did a job on your poor heroine. I mean, this is the kid who wants to go into science class, but instead she's assigned to be this sort of woman warrior in a very patriarchal society, which is rather weird. And she discovers a lot of things about herself that she hadn't realized. Apparently, this puritanical culture has no objections to gene splicing. And she finds out that her genome has been played with so that she is in fact a I'm not good on tongue twisters. A shapeshifter.
Yeah.
She can become a panther, a hawk, and what's her marine
this is funny. So everybody teases me about this, so I'll just put this out there so I can make fun of myself before everybody else does. Okay. So she can become a panther, and she can become a hawk, and she can become a wolf, but she can also become a leopard seal. And so everyone, when I was doing the PR for this book, Mary mentioned that originally we were going to do this prologue back in September, and for personal reasons, I had to reschedule that. And so I was doing a lot of podcasts and stuff around this time. And one of the podcast hosts were teasing me mercilessly. They're like, oh, she's a leopard seal. So what does she do in a battle? Just flop around? Does she just wave her flippers? Does she try to swim through the mud? What does she do? And it was because I made her this because one of, in this post-apocalyptic version of the world, there are these great houses that in each one of them houses one of the royal shapeshifter families. And there are these leopard seals are very vicious. They're not like your average little gray seal that we all think it balances like a ball on its nose.
I've actually seen them. They're mean.
They're so mean, right?
They eat penguins. Killer whales will not attack them.
Yes, so that's why she's a leopard seal and not like one of the cute little gray seals that you see in the aquarium who's like tossing a little red ball back and forth. Yes, exactly. So she's like that, but mean. And so my vision for this is that San Francisco is recreated in my novel as House San Fresco. And it is half submerged, half underwater, and then half above ground. And so the shapeshifters who live in House San Fresco and defend House San Fresco need to be able to get into the water, fight back any oncoming threats, and then on land, they've compensated for not being a fierce warrior like a panther or like a wolf by becoming master strategists. They're military strategists. So, but those are her four that she can shapeshift into. So we have the hawk, and that is the skumaskat is what it's called. It's the term for the shadow shapeshifting animal of New York, which we call Mont York in the book. And then there is, where there's another house, which is Vic, which is where the wolves are. And of course, we have House San Fresco and another one as well. So I had a lot of fun envisioning these houses and really layering this is the second book in the series. It's a trilogy, and there's also a prequel novella and a short story collection. And I had a lot of fun. The first book was kind of more straight up romantic dystopian with a little hint of fantasy in there, kind of, sort of. And then this one, I got to really go a little wild with the fantasy piece. The romance is still in there because it's me, but there's a more fantastical element in there too. And so that was so much fun just to imagine these different houses and the different shapeshifters that might live there and how geography would influence them and everything. So it was really great.
Yeah, Ava, as we learn in the book, is learning how to be a shapeshifter, and part of the problem with that is that to do this, she needs kind of a familiar or a side or roughly a sidekick.
Yes.
To help her with her transitions and help her presumably get back into human form and whatever. Mm-hmm. And poor Ari who gave up everything for love with her, cannot be this. And so she gets assigned this other individual whom you introduce. And what's worse, she finds out that basically your houses are sort of medieval in that as a shapeshifter, she's expected to be wedded off to the heir or prince of one of the houses. So poor Ari gets shafted twice.
Yeah, he does.
Bless his poor pointy sword.
Yes,
Anyway,
bless his pointy sword. Yes, his spear.
Anyway.
Is going to tell you. Yes.
Yes, whichever. So we've got you set up a terrible problem for true love to overcome here. So.
Well, and for me, I feel like if you make things easy for your characters, your book's kind of boring, right? So you kind of put your characters in, I think anyway, into the hottest water you can possibly place them in, and then they have to kind of leap out of it. And so, poor Ari, he did have quite a time of it because he does love Eva so deeply. And, the way it works in my world is that in order to shapeshift, there's kind of a science behind it a little bit. It takes a tremendous amount of energy. And so the familiar, their role is to pull, as the Skumaskat pulls energy from the earth, it goes through the familiar who grounds them. And without that, the shapeshifter will die, right? And so, Ari is not trained in this way. He's trained as a warrior. He thinks he should be able to do everything. He doesn't want anyone else to take this crucial role in her life, but her life is on the line, and every time he tries to anchor her in a shapeshift, it almost kills him. So, the person who becomes, steps into the role in his stead is somebody that he cannot stand and who cannot stand him either. So there's a real rivalry there, and I think that also makes it very complicated for my poor characters.
Well, it helps that the chosen familiar happens to be gay, so there's no competition there or anything.
Yeah, I think for them, that's not something necessarily that they realize at first, but even beyond that, I think for Ari, they're coming out of this world where love is forbidden, lust is forbidden, so they don't really have a sense of what all of this means. All he knows really is that he wants to be there for Eva. He wants to support her. He doesn't really trust this other person. And here's this other person stepping into this very intimate role in her life that would potentially keep her alive. And it's someone that he barely knows, doesn't like, and doesn't trust. And he's very skeptical of everybody's motives, which is kind of his MO. So poor Ari, he's in an impossible position.
Yes. Okay, Miss Mary, I see we have some questions coming in. Let me shut up and give some others a chance to ask Emily some questions.
We do have a couple questions. This one is from Jessica, and she asks, how did you choose the cities where your characters visited on their trek to Montana, or the cities that were mentioned?
It's a good question. I think the only city that I really reference as they travel, although it's not by name, is Chicago. I wanted a place that would be iconic, a place that the reader, if they chose to follow the route on the map, would have the opportunity to recognize. And so when I was thinking about Chicago, and I was thinking about the Great Lakes, and I was thinking about Museum Mile, and I just was imagining someplace. I didn't want just kind of anywhere USA. I wanted someplace that could be a character kind of in and of itself, that could stand in for the ruin, that that the world had experienced, where the reader would look at that and be like, oh, wait a minute. And like when you're writing this post-apocalyptic kind of a world and your characters have been so sheltered, the reader is in on secrets that your characters don't know. The reader knows what the United States looked like before. My characters refer to it as the Empire. And so, for them, they don't know, but the readers do. And I think that's a nice little trick. The Commonwealths, there's several of them. The Commonwealth of Ashes, which is in Asheville, is the largest one. And I put it in Asheville because I was thinking about what's defensible, right? So these people in my world, these people who retreat to the Commonwealth, so they're going to places after a war that they want, like little enclaves that they want to be able to defend. And of course, in military strategy, the higher up you are, the better able you are to see what's coming. And so I chose the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, because I knew them. And I also, when I created the Commonwealths after this war, I wanted the Commonwealths to be located near major weapons depots in the United States, because again, they're thinking about how can this be defensible? And so I clustered all the Commonwealths in the South. And then I decided that I really wanted to extend the territory of across the country where these great houses and shapeshifters were. So I chose iconic places. So I chose New York. I made into Mont York, and I have mythology in there where they have to tell stories of the skyscrapers that sprung like seeds from the earth and grew tall and fell. And then I chose Montana because it's so absolutely beautiful, but it goes by a different name. Arizona is Satrazona. San Francisco is San Francisco. So again, these really iconic, beautiful places where I could use our landmarks and stuff that the reader would recognize to create a world that was our world, but not our world. Basically, our world immersed in ruin. And that's how I did it. And I think it was really good for me to do that because it helped me ground myself. And it gave me, when you're writing fantasy, there are no limitations, there are no margins, there are no borders. And yet you have to create those for yourself because you're creating the rules and the limits of your world. And so placing parts of my story in these locales helped me figure out what that would be and how long people would take to get from one place or another. So that's how I chose it. And for me, it's worked out really well. And I do love having those little Easter eggs that the reader will know that my characters don't. So I hope that answers it.
Mary, do we have another question?
Yes, we do. And in fact, there's a follow-up to that, which I'll incorporate in this because you did mention before you use Google Maps, which I love Google Maps. I just think they're awesome. Did you actually go down into Street View on some of your places?
Yes, and I use Google Earth as well.
Oh, Google Earth, yeah.
You can get that three-dimensional. So I did. I really did. And I've used it for other projects as well. There were other writing projects that I was working on that were set in different places. And once that tool kind of was made available to me, a writer friend mentioned it to me. She was like, you should, because I was working on a different project, not this project. I had already finished the first book here, and I was writing something that was set actually in the Bronx, a neighborhood of the Bronx in New York. And she happened to live up there. And so I was saying, well, where would my character live and what would his apartment be? And he's got a little son. Where would he take his little son to the park? And how would he do this? And she said, well, I'll take you on a walk with me and I'll have my phone out and you can see everything that I see. But you can also use Google Earth, because she had used that for a book she'd written that was set internationally. And she said, it really gives you the opportunity to have Street View and to see everything in 360. And so that is what I did. And I have used it for these projects as well, for my Seven Sins series as well, when I want to really see, okay, what are the landmarks here? What does it look like here? Oh, you can see my friend in the chat. She's actually up in New York. So she says this would be me actually sitting here. Yeah. So I think, but that's one of the great things about, see her, there's her little head kicking in. That was my writing consultant. That's a fellow writer friend of mine. And she actually is part of the Fellowship of the Five that we published that anthology together. So, during the pandemic, 5 writers, myself included, all around the world kind of bonded and got together. So we've been talking online for 2.5 years, and I'm in New York City right now, actually. I'm not in Wilmington. And this is the first time that my friend Lisa, who was the designer of that anthology, Unbound, have ever met in person. Yet we've enjoyed this rich writing life together for 2.5 years. So, that to me is one of the miracle things about tools like Google Earth and tools like the internet, this virtual ability to form these bonds, even in times and places like what's going on with the pandemic. That writerly connection, I think, is so helpful. Building that community is so helpful.
Well, I think then your answer to the next question, did you visit Chicago at any point while you were writing it?
I didn't visit Chicago because my characters, now I have other times, for example, when I wrote my first book, The Memory Thief, I don't know if anyone who's listening has read it, but it is about a mountain climber who comes back from the dead by possessing somebody else, and he does this to keep a promise to his dead wife, right? And so I knew nothing about mountain climbing. I'm completely acrophobic. I'd rather not stand on a step stool, which, as I'm very short, is highly problematic. And a lot of this book was set, The Memory Thief, in Colorado. So in that case, because so much of the book was grounded in a sport that I wasn't aware of, and so much of the book was grounded in a place, literally, chapters after chapters set in Boulder, Colorado, I did at that point forge a consulting relationship with a mountain climber who could go over everything that I had written and planned for my character, just to make sure that I'd gotten it right. And of course I didn't at first and had to correct it. And I did take not one, but 2 trips to Boulder, Colorado, and all over Colorado, actually, in the course of writing The Memory Thief, because it was so important for me to ground myself in that story. My second adult book, The Dreamkeeper's Daughter, a big chunk of that is set in Barbados. And I had the tremendous privilege of going to Barbados for 10 days to research that book. And I did some fun beachy stuff, but I also spent a lot of time interviewing people and submerged up to here in papers and primary sources and archives. So, but with this particular book, they were really only passing through Chicago. And so I wasn't setting anything there. And the version of Montana that they spend time in was a city I made up. And so it incorporated some characteristics in terms of the landscape and the weather, but a lot of it was based on a mythological system and a world that had been decimated and regrown after climate change. So I just looked for major landmarks. And I imagined and envisioned what those major landmarks might have looked like if they were decimated by floods and war and all of that. But I definitely, in other books where I've set large chunks of those books, in other places where I've never been, I do end up doing a tremendous amount of research. In fact, I have a manuscript that, an adult manuscript for my 3rd adult book that I am working through right now. And part of it is set in 1920s New York City. And so back before the pandemic, when I was doing my research for that, I came and I spent actually a bunch of time in the archives, which is like the bowels, like below the earth, basically, of the Manhattan Transit Authority Museum. And you have to get permission to go in. You have to wear a special tag. Someone has to sit with you in the archives. And I got to look at all these amazing photographs of the trains that ran back then, which are crucial to my story, what Grand Central Station looked like back then, also crucial to my story, which has a kidnapping in it and all kinds of stuff. So, I think that having the privilege to do a combo of in-person research is invaluable, but I also do always want to say that I would never want to discourage an emerging writer or a writer who, is daunted by any sort of physical disability or emotional challenge or financial constraint from doing that research. There are so many tools available right now that are free of charge, where you don't have to leave your sofa or your writing desk or your bed or wherever you happen to sit to write. You can employ Google Earth. You can go online to, particularly in the pandemic, so many museums have made their collections virtual. You can reach out to researchers who are only too happy to share information with you. You can contact libraries that will send you stuff in interlibrary loans. So I have had the tremendous privilege in my life of visiting the places that I have written about in many cases, but I did have the challenge of trying to write some stuff like this during the pandemic when none of us were going anywhere. And those virtual free of charge tools are available to any writer who can access the internet. And they are invaluable for making your world come to life.
Speaking of research, I know you to be a very gentle, peaceful person, but let us say that in Siege of the Seven Sins, there is rather a lot of fighting going on. Swords clashing, hack and slash. You come so close to producing your own personal equivalent of the of Game of Thrones Red Wedding there, but how did you research your martial arts?
So my son is a 3rd degree black belt, and he teaches martial arts. And so I have spent, not since the pandemic, but before that, I spent 4 or 5 days a week sitting in martial arts classes. I am the clumsiest person you could ever hope to meet. So I don't do any martial arts. Like yoga and walking is as far as I go. But, you know, so I had kind of absorbed a lot of this culture, and my stepson as well does mixed martial arts. So I had absorbed some of that. And we also have quite a collection of swords that my son has either won in tournaments, which he used to do years ago, or gotten throughout the years as gifts for martial arts. And so I was able to speak to him and really be like, okay, in this scenario, how would you hold the sword? What would you do? If you were going to knock somebody over, where would you exert pressure? How would this work? And then my significant other, when I was writing the action scenes, you know, he would talk to me about, okay, so if you're really, you know, I've never hit anybody in my life, as you say, I'm peaceful, but like, you know, if you really want to knock somebody out, you do this, or, you know, a real fight wouldn't go on that long. And then when I was writing one of the initial scenes in the book, without giving too much away, it's a scene where the first book ends with my two main characters having escaped. You know, they're very dire circumstance in the Commonwealth, but they're not out of danger yet, far from it, right? And so the first book starts with this intimation that the very people they tried to flee from are hunting them down. And they have a little bit of advance warning thanks to Eva's supernatural abilities, but that doesn't mean they don't have to stand and fight. And so, you know, my two main characters, they live and die by the sword. The people that they're with fight with guns. They don't trust each other. They have this uneasy truce, but they have to fight together. And so we were trying to think about what would this look like. And so my partner said to me, well, what about that battle? What's it called? Thermopylae or something like that, where there's this narrow pass. And I was like, oh, you're absolutely right. They would have chosen a site that has a narrow pass where as their enemies come through, they would be picked off one by one. And he said, okay, but like really think about what resources they have in the natural world. What could they use there? Because they can't carry a lot with them because they're trekking around. What would they use there to create traps? And so I started researching, you know, the types of traps that, for instance, were used in the Vietnam War and other sorts of things to really create, you know, traps in the natural environment, you know, whether it's a hole and then like moss and branches laid over it and someone steps through and then they fall and break their leg. And so I had a lot of help with the inspiration behind those action scenes. But then once I got into them, I had so much fun writing them. And really for me, it's all about, you know, the characterization. So no matter what your character is doing, every scene should tell you something about your character and should move the plot forward in some way. So if my characters are fighting, it's not just that they're fighting. That's kind of like meaningless to me. It's not, you know, just a bloodbath. It's okay. They're fighting here, but they don't trust that person next to them. So at the end of the scene, do I want them to trust that person next to them more or less? If I want them to trust them less, what does this character value? Well, my character already values the ability to be courageous in a fight and the ability to be skillful in a fight. If the person he doesn't really trust kind of falls down in a fight and runs away and leaves him there, he's going to trust him less because that's the way he values things. So that, I think, for me, made it feel more natural, is running it through that character filter in my head, whether it was like a bloodbath fighting scene or whether it was a romantic scene or whether it was a political scene. It's all about like that plot plus character equals story equation in my head.
Thank you. Mary, I see some more questions have come in.
Yes, we do have a few. Let's start with this one from Jean. You seem to toggle between YA and adult fiction. Does your agent handle both genres?
It's a good question. So my agent is not a YA agent. She is an adult fiction agent. And that said, I love her dearly. She's been my agent since my very first book, and I just adore her. And so when I was first seeking to place my YA fiction, she said, you know, I want to be your adult fiction agent forever, but I'm maybe not the best person to agent YA. Maybe you want to think about having two agents, me for your adult fiction and somebody else for your young adult fiction. And I was like, oh, you're gonna have to start all over again, getting a second agent, because finding an agent is hard, y'all. And what I discovered at that point in time, it's kind of coming back now, but this was a few years ago, and dystopian fiction was really out. Like everybody was sick of the Hunger Games, everyone was sick of the Maze Runner. Nobody wanted those kinds of stories. And in publishing, in traditional publishing anyway, what you're seeing on the shelves was signed on contract 18 months to 2 years before. The wheels of traditional big five publication, or even beyond that, slightly smaller traditional presses, it grinds very slowly. So traditional houses are always looking for the next right thing. They're projecting out, what is it going to be 18 months to 2 years from now? And so I shopped the book around and I got a lot of, we love this writing, but we're just not publishing this type of genre anymore. And so I was really trying to figure out, what do I want to do? I knew I believed in the story. I knew I believed in the trilogy. And I had a very good friend who operates a small North Carolina-based publishing house. It's a small traditional house called Blue Crow. And I talked to her about it, and I said, I knew they had actually recently published a dystopian YA series. And I said, would you be interested in this? And it turned out she was. And so what I did do, so I found that house on my own, but I did have my agent vet the contracts just to make sure that I wasn't screwing up, that I wasn't doing anything that I shouldn't. So, I think if I were to try and get a larger traditional publishing deal with a future YA book, if that was something that I wanted to do, then I would have to find a YA agent, because your agent, their job is to have relationships, and their job is to connect you to the people that they know and the editors that they know. And my agent is a treasure trove for adult fiction, but YA isn't her thing. So depending where I decide to go after this trilogy, this series is done, I might get a separate YA agent, but I don't know. Right now I'm having so much fun with this, but it is tricky when you decide to write to two different markets. Some people choose to use pen names. Some people choose to have two different websites. Some people choose to have two sets of social media accounts. I didn't want to make it that complicated for myself. But many people do make that choice, and there are a lot of merits to doing that as well. So for me, it's all part of the same journey. I love to read both YA and adult fiction, and I think it's natural for me to want to write them both as well. But yeah, it's a balancing act, and it's like wearing two different hats because it's two very different markets.
Let me ask you this. How is writing for a YA audience or market different from say, writing an adult novel or fiction story? I mean, I know that at least even before Harry Potter, there was often quite an overlap between of adult readers who loved some specific YA titles and such.
Mm-hmm. I think a couple of things. So I teach a young adult fiction writing class for a Canadian-based group called Authors Publish. I love them and they are wonderful, and I get to do that virtually. And as part of that, it's a month-long class, and as part of that, I delve into the market and the history of the market. And so you're absolutely right, Ben, that there is a massive chunk of young adult fiction readership that is adult. That's for sure. And I think that, true YA stories, they're timeless, right? All of us at some point were 16, 15, 17, unless we're going through that right now. And so we can identify with that. We can remember what that used to be like. I think the thing is that when you're writing for young adults, that if you're writing contemporary, which I don't write contemporary, I write, fantasy and sci-fi. But if you're writing contemporary, then you have to really be sure that you're sounding like a teen that's growing up in whatever era that you're writing about. So if you're writing about a teen who's growing up in 2021, you have to know what slang kids are actually using. You have to know, if you have all your kids on Instagram and most of them have left it behind and are using Snapchat or TikTok or whatever it is, you have to be really, really in tune. And the best way to do that is to hang out with a bunch of teens and to have actual real life teens read your work and to read as many books in your genre as you possibly can. But that is one big important thing to do, And then another difference too is that your teenage characters in many cases are experiencing things for the first time. Their first kiss, their true independence, they're maybe going away from home, driving a car for the first time. So to really immerse yourself in what it's like when these things are new, what it's like to have. There's one thing I love about writing YA is that I'm drawn to extremes in my fiction writing. The Memory Thief, we've got this guy who is a mountain climber and then is killed in an avalanche and then is dead and comes back. You don't get much more extreme than that. And one thing I love about writing YA is you don't have to work for those extremes. They're just there. They're built into what it means to be a teenager. And so that is another thing that I really love about it. And also a lot of the time when I write YA, it can be more fast-paced. YA readers are very smart, especially the teens that are reading. They have so much that they could be doing with their time. And even the teens who love to read, God bless them, they live in a world of memes and 30-second reels and 50-second, TikTok videos. And so gone are the days where, if you build it, they will come. You really have to make your writing engaging, interesting, exciting, different, appealing. And so that is a challenge. And to be, not the same as everything that's out there in the market, while simultaneously being true to your voice in the story that you want to tell. So it is a balancing act, but for me, it's kind of the two halves of my brain. And so I really love kind of shifting back and forth between those markets.
More questions, Miss Mary?
Yes, we do. Jessica asked, when writing character dialogue, do you hear the distinct voices of each character? And have you ever found yourself talking to or talking as one of your characters when you're immersed in the writing?
That's a great question, Jessica. I love that question. So I often will read my dialogue aloud if I'm the least bit worried about it, to see if it's stilted, does it sound funny? I use an app called Voice Dream Reader when my books are to the point where I'm kind of going through the final edit and proof on my own, so I can hear how the entire book, including the dialogue, sounds aloud, because I pick up different things. I could proof something over and over and over and over reading it, but when I listen to it, especially the dialogue, I'm like, well, that word doesn't need to be there. That sounds stilted, or who the heck would even say that, So I do that. I feel like there's a little bit of me in every character I write. And so I do sometimes actually slip into talking like one of my characters. And in fact, an early version of Ari, so Ari, when he talks, he says, yeah, at the end of a lot of things, like when he's asking a question, or even when he's making a statement, like, you want to do that, yeah? And this is how he talks. And so I was so used to, after months of being an Ari brain, writing this book, I started talking like that. And my partner was like, oh my God, that is so annoying. Can you please stop? Who talks like that? Who have you been around? And I was like, oh, it's just my imaginary friend. But, I feel like writing dialogue, dialogue is another thing that is so great, because every piece of dialogue should, again, teach you something new about a character, move the story forward. You do your dialogue tags, he said, she said. You don't have to have that. You can show the contrast between, your character might be saying the nicest thing in the world, like, I don't know, you look great today, you were amazing, thank you for showing up. But if we're in that character's head and we know what they're really thinking is, curse you, I cannot believe you're here, really, you of all people, then you can use your dialogue as an exterior voice to show the contrast between your character's interior voice, and that teaches the reader something different about your character too. So I love, and dialogue also does a great job of establishing voice. Each of your characters should speak differently. Someone should be able to pick up your book in the middle of a scene, and if you have multiple points of view, they should be able to look at the way that character sounds and see who's talking. And so you can do so much with dialogue, and I try really hard to make sure that my characters sound different from each other on the page.
One more question there, Miss Mary?
Yes, there is. I actually have two. There's another one that I got. First, Jessica asked, did you do a lot of scientific research to learn about gene splicing?
That is a good question. I did not do that much research about it, because it was set in this futuristic society where the genes that were being spliced were actually partially the genes of a shapeshifter. And so my characters are in this futuristic society where there are no nuclear families. There's only artificial insemination. All the babies are created basically by in vitro fertilization, right? And then they are implanted in surrogates. And so nobody knows that this is the case in terms of how Eva has gotten to be who she is. Nobody understands that about her, least of all Eva, until way through the first book. But they do know that there's a genetics lab. And they know that in this genetics lab, people, for example, who are born, they call them natural borns, who are born to parents who have gone, broken the rules of the Commonwealth and gotten together and had babies in a way that's strictly forbidden. Those folks are sentenced to kind of do the menial jobs of the Commonwealth, but every single other person is a product of the genetics lab, the gen lab, they call it. And so, Eva doesn't know too much about what goes on in there, and she doesn't know too much about what it took to make her who she is. And that's part of, I think, what makes the story credible, because if she was too knowledgeable about that, maybe she would suspect something about herself, but we see the world through her eyes. And so she has no idea that shapeshifters exist. She has no idea why suddenly she is able to do things she could never do before. She has no idea that she was, created in a way that's any different whatsoever than anybody else. So the reader is really discovering this along with Eva, and maybe in the third book, I'll have to do more research to see how this will come together. But right now, we only know what Eva knows, which is that she was in for a very nasty surprise.
Well, we do have another question, and this one came from Kate, and she asked, could you tell us more about your next book, the one you were setting in New York City?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. That's an adult book. So that book doesn't have a publisher yet. In fact, I'm still in the process of retooling it, but it is super near and dear to my heart. That book is about, it's set partially in contemporary times and partially in 1920s New York. But the heart of it is this, that in 1920s New York, a couple years before the Great Depression, in New York, there is a little park called Gramercy Park. If you're not familiar with it, it's an incredibly exclusive park. You could only get in and you can only get out with a key. There's no entering it, there's no scaling the fence. Okay. And then in New York, there's also the Lower East Side. And that is where, when my family as Jewish immigrants came to the United States in the very early 1900s, that's where they settled. And they lived in a tenement. And I did go to New York and tour a tenement, to the Tenement Museum, so I could see what that was like and what my ancestors had experienced. So the heart of my story is this. In early 1920s New York City, there is a young girl named Ella Carter. She's only 2 or 3 years old. And she is in Gramercy Park with her nanny, that wealthy, ritzy park that locks on both sides with the key. And they're having a picnic and it starts to snow. And her nanny says, "Oh, Ella, honey, we have to go home." Packs everything up, and the nanny drops some stuff in the snow. And she leans over to pick up whatever it is in the snow. The little girl's 2, she toddles off. The little girl sees a man holding a kitten outside the fence. He waves. And she's entranced and she toddles closer. And when the nanny straightens up, the little girl is gone. All she sees are the little girl's footsteps, and then outside in the snow is her abandoned teddy bear. Miles away, just a couple miles away, in impoverished Lower East Side, New York City, the complete opposite of this ritzy, high-class, super wealthy enclave, there is a poor Jewish family, and the little girls just desperately want to go outside and play in the snow. And the older little girl begs to be able to take her little sister out into the snow. So finally her grandmother, her booby, who's watching her, says, "Okay, but just be careful, and not so long that you should freeze." Modeled after, of course, my own family. So they go out into the snow. A snowball fight ensues. The older little girl is having the best time. She looks up, just sees footsteps. Her younger sister is gone. So 1.5 miles from each other, these 2 completely different little girls in 2 completely different circumstances disappear. Well, the wealthy family becomes devastated. Both families are devastated, but the wealthy family has resources that the poor Jewish family, my own heritage, couldn't imagine having. They put ads in all the papers. We're talking Rockefeller level wealth, you know. A year later in Chicago with another little family, they find this little girl who was orphaned on a train basically and taken in, and they take her in and they adopt her. And then they see this ad in the paper and they realize, oh my gosh, this is who this little girl really is. She belongs to these other people. And so they tell the wealthy family, you know, the little girl's only 2 or 3, tiny. Kids change a lot in that time. The wealthy family takes the little girl back home. All is as it should be until the poor Jewish mother from the Lower East Side comes forward and says, that's not your daughter, that's mine. And so what ensues, whose daughter is it really? Who wins this battle? Why is this battle won or not won? And a feud springs up between these two families, a terrible feud over the years because the rich family keeps the child. And so the poor family believes they've been victimized. The rich family believes the poor family is greedy and grasping. And years later, a member of each family meets and falls in love. And still the truth is not known. And so the issue is, who really is that woman now in her 90s? Whose daughter is she and who was right all along? So that's what that story is. And it's a mystery and it's historical and there's a lot of romance in there. So there's kissing because it's me. But it's not quite right yet. I'm tweaking it right now, but I'm having so much fun writing it.
Is there a character named Judge Solomon in there someplace?
There is not, but there is a character in there named Lily, a very important character who's modeled after my own great aunt. And so this is the first time I've ever written about my own immigrant Jewish heritage on the page. And it was so interesting and fascinating for me just to delve deeper into that experience and really represent it and intertwine it with another story. So that project, it's called The Ghost Girls, and it's near and dear to my heart. So hopefully we'll be able to whip that one into shape soon, but I've been having so much fun with it.
Oh, wow. Mary, do we have any other questions left at the moment?
We do not.
Okay, so now we're waiting for book number 3, that is Shadows of the Seven Sins. When can readers expect that one?
So book number 3 is, so there is a Shadows of the Seven Sins. That's the short story collection. Okay. So book number 3 comes out next summer. So there's I don't know why I let my sweet, sweet editor talk me into naming every single book in this series something that started with S. So the first book is the prequel novella, which is online, digital only, completely free. And that's Sacrifice of the Seven Sins. And so if you haven't read any of these books before and you just want a taste of the world in like a totally no risk manner, and you've got access to like a Kindle or an iPad or an iPhone, however you read your digital books, Sacrifice of the Seven Sins is available on every platform at no charge whatsoever. And then there's Sword of the Seven Sins, which is the first book in the series, and Siege of the Seven Sins, which is the second book in the series. And then right before Siege came out, that's it. Right before Siege came out, I published Blue Crow Press published a short story collection called Shadows of the Seven Sins. And I loved writing that so much because it was like a slice of little characters' points of views that I didn't have the opportunity to include in the main series. And it actually made me think about my characters in some different and original ways and introduce some new characters that I hadn't thought would walk onto the stage of the story in a way that made me just want to tell their stories at greater length. So I had so much fun with that. And then the last one is Storm of the Seven Sins, and that one comes out next summer, so summer 2022. And I just, I have found it to be so much fun to create this as an entire world. It's just been such a wonderful opportunity. And if you go to my website, emilycolin.com, you can see a couple book trailers that we made, which are like mini movie trailers, essentially. But they tell the story of Sword of the Seven Sins, the first book, and there's another one for Siege of the Seven Sins too. And then you can see little clips, little images of what these characters look like in my mind too, which is lots of fun.
Thank you, Miss Emily.
Thank you, Ben.
And thank you to the audience for listening in tonight. We'll be back after Christmas. Our guest then will be Bland Simpson, the keyboard player for the Red Gay Ramblers and the Nature Rider Supreme. He has a new book out from the University of North Carolina Press, North Carolina, Land of Water, Land of Sky, in which he actually gets into the mountains as well as the coastline area. And that will be coming up in January. Thank you once again, Miss Mary.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Emily. It was great to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me. I had the most wonderful time, and thank you to the audience for such fantastic questions.
And please keep tweaking. I can't wait for the new book.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.